No guy just wants to talk to a wall of AI chatbots. So he'll have a chatbot, you'll have a chatbot, and your chatbots will just be having a million conversations with other chatbots. And so all the dating now and conversation and messiness of dating is all going to be mediated through two AIs just like talking to one another.
Today we have NYU professor Jay Van Bavel on the show. Dr. Van Bavel is an expert on intergroup relations and social identity. I find his research so important and timely. In this episode, we discuss what the world looks like through the lens of identity, how we can escape our echo chambers and overcome our bias, the role of social media in creating a funhouse mirror, and how we can ultimately find solidarity and peace with our fellow humans, even those we perceive in our outgroup. There is a lot of really valuable information in this episode that is relevant to so much of what we're seeing in the world today. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Jay Van Bavel. Jay Van Bavel.
How's it going?
So exciting. It is so exciting. I am so excited to have you on the Psychology Podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. I followed your work for quite some time. I have to say mostly on Twitter. You're very active.
I spend too much time there. As you know, my wife complains all the time about it.
I don't know that your wife complains all the time about it, but I can say that it is very elucidating for me to follow it. You know, it keeps me like up to date on the latest science, which I love. So that's pretty cool. So thank you for doing that service.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. You are director of the Social Identity and Morality Lab at NYU. Wow. Has that been the name of your labs from inception?
No, my research has evolved. When I first started at NYU, I focused on like how we see the world. It was a social perception and evaluation lab. But over time, we've really focused on identities, how people identify in groups and how that changes how they think about people, how it changes their moral judgments. And so about 5 years ago, we decided to change it.
Okay. Well, it really seems relevant to everything in the world right now.
Yeah. I mean, I see many issues that we're dealing with, whether you're talking about like racism, the pandemic, climate change, you know, or working in organizations, your day-to-day job. All of those things are relevant to identity.
Do you think the people who are like anti-identity, they themselves really do have an identity? They just won't admit it?
Yeah.
Their identity is anti-identity?
Yeah. I mean, everybody has an identity. So we do this at the start of our book. The very first chapter, I encouraged you to do this too. We'll do it right now.
Okay,
this little challenge. Because a lot of people think, well, I'm just an individual. America is hyper individualistic. So that's how people think about themselves. But let's do this task. And I'll encourage everybody listening, pull out a pen and answer this question 10 times. And I'm just going to get you to shout out yours. I am blank. Okay, Scott, go. Do this 10 times.
Harry.
I am Harry. Okay, that's no one answered leads with that.
The first thing I thought of.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I am kind, silly, cheeky, smart, creative, funny, too sexy. I think it's 10.
Okay, well, it's close.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's lots of different ways to answer this. Okay, so one way you can answer is with traits.
Which is that obviously I went down
you went down like the very personality profile
I
way.
didn't do like whites.
So everybody, I hope everybody like can look at their list now. Yeah. And you can divide those up into a couple of different ways. The first way is how many of them are traits? Like I am cheeky or I am like introverted or extroverted.
Yeah.
The other way that you can chunk those up is relational.
Okay.
Like I'm a husband in a relationship.
That's
or
true.
I'm a
roles
good
or
friend.
Social roles.
And the other way is in terms of group identities.
Okay.
So when I do it, I would say like I'm a professor, I'm an author, I'm a Canadian, I'm also a New Yorker. Those are some of my identities. And so you can count out of those 10, how many of them are like these trait-like things of you as an individual and how many are about our relationships. And when we did this on our newsletter. We like put in, people can go on and complete this on our newsletter, this little quiz. Something like 60 to 70% of what the average person puts are about their relationships and groups that they belong to. And so even though people think of themselves as an individual, most of us are thinking about ourselves in terms of our identities with groups. And the whole point of this is that once you think about yourself that way, it comes with a different way of seeing the world. So I'll just give you a quick example. So right now I'm here maybe as an author to promote a book or tell you about it. And when I became an author, I became a community that includes you. And all these other authors like reached out to me. I got included in like group chats, got advice, support that I had never gotten before. But when I go home, I'm like a father. I have to like suddenly stop thinking about the podcast and thinking about like, how do I get dinner for my kids?
And husband.
Yeah. And then also a husband. Yeah. And then maybe like after my kids go to bed, I'm like a hockey fan. So I'll turn on like the playoffs. Gotcha. And so all of these are different types of, and then when I go back to work tomorrow morning, I'm a professor, and I'm thinking about myself in terms of my research or my teaching, all of these. And then yesterday was Mother's Day. So I had to call my mom. So I'm a son. There's certain responsibilities that come when you're a son. Yeah. And so all of these are different identities that I have, come with different roles, norms, expectations, ways of thinking about the world.
But there are implications of which lens you choose, right? Like if you view things through the lens of identity, like social, like group identity, that's there are implications of that, right? Yeah. Which don't follow if you don't. I don't, as you note, as you could see, I don't tend to immediately think of myself, in terms of my relation to groups. Yeah. That's really not the way I think. I don't know what it is about me that makes that a certain way. Are there individual difference traits that predict whether or not you're going to be obsessed with your social groups or not?
Yeah. I mean, one of the classic ones about how much you conform to the groups you're in is called self-monitoring. Do you remember this one? And some people are like a social chameleon. And they're constantly thinking about how do I fit into the group I'm in and adapting to blend in.
But I like being the one who says the crazy thing that separates me from the group. What is that?
Okay, so we have a whole chapter on different motivations that guide people to identify with certain groups. A big part of identifying with a group is your need to belong. And that's something very basic. Humans are our evolutionary skill set that made us, that we can dominate the earth and send people to the moon and stuff, is we cooperate well and communicate well. And that's about belonging. Okay. And if we had gotten kicked out of our groups on the African Serengeti, we would have died. Yeah. And so we're like hyper tuned to exclusion and things like that. Sure. The other dimension though, that's often seen as at odds with it, and I think you probably score high in this, is need for distinctiveness. Some people like to be distinct from others and stand out or be a contrarian.
Are you basically calling me a narcissist?
No, it's not necessarily narcissistic. It can be a way to gain social status. Yeah. But that's not necessarily a narcissistic thing. Like artists do this all the time. Athletes, great scientists sometimes try to stand out. So there's lots of incentives for standing out. And so the groups that often might be more appealing to most people, and maybe you in particular, if you do have identities, are ones that scratch both those itches.
So stand-up comedians,
yeah. They're on stage, but they also like love being part of this comedian community. Yeah. And that's called optimal distinctiveness. Oh, okay. And so the groups that scratch both those itches are often super appealing to people because they make you feel a sense of belonging and distinctiveness. And I'll give you an example since you're wearing a leather jacket. Yeah. If you're like in the subway in New York and you see a bunch of people coming back to like a punk concert, and they're all like dressed the same in their leathers and black. And if you ask them if they're conformists, they'll tell you no. But of course you look at them and they all look the same. Or like when I was growing up, it was like goths.
It's true.
And so these
skinheads.
And so a lot of these are groups that are distinctive from the rest of society. Right. And so they scratch that itch for being distinctive and special, but also make you feel a sense of belonging. I'll say another example of this that we're familiar with is like prestigious universities. What is one of the top things they advertise on their websites and the rankings is how hard it is to get in. Yeah. And that's a signal of distinctiveness. I'm Canadian and they don't advertise that. That's a very American way of signaling status.
Oh, interesting.
Is like how exclusive it is to get into the university that you belong.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, I feel like things are changing where everything has to be inclusive.
Yeah. Whether or not they're selecting based on affirmative action or whatever. Yeah. Like Harvard still has a 5% acceptance rate, 95% rejection rate. Wow. And so it's just that they're selecting on different dimensions, whether or not they're using the SAT.
I feel like Asians are getting discriminated against these days.
Well, if you're Asian, you have to have a higher SAT score or whatever to get in. Yeah. But that's not new. So in the, Harvard, I think, was one of the first universities to start using standardized tests. Okay. To give people who are from lower income classes and weren't part of like this New England prep school world an opportunity to get in.
Right.
But then they found out they were admitting too many Jews.
Oh, yeah.
And so then they started.
We don't want that.
Yeah. And they didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so they then they added like interviews and things like that so they could weed out people who didn't like fit their vision of like a Harvard man. So those types of things have been used forever to discriminate against different groups. That's partly why they were implemented.
I mean, your work has so many implications for like all of the most controversial things going on in our society today. And you do a really great job of not getting mirrored in the muck of it all. So again, another kudos to you. Like you managed to write about this stuff in a way that is uncontroversial, but there are really a lot of implications, you know, like, let's talk about DEI programs, right? Why not? What do you think about like this obsessive focus on intersectional identity as being the main focus for DEI training? Because there's lots of other different kinds of diversity one could talk about. You could talk about idea diversity. You could talk about even neurodiversity, you know, which is not skin deep. It's deeper, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I mean, I'll say a few things about this.
Cool.
I actually, like, my very first research when I was at graduate school was about like reducing implicit biases, and my research was actually.
Who's your advisor?
Will Cunningham.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so he came from like Mazarine Banaji's lab, and so we were doing that stuff pretty early on. And my dissertation research was like cited in the Supreme Court on a ruling on affirmative action. So I've been interested in speaking and writing about that for a long time. And so it's kind of interesting in that like it's a very trendy space, kind of like fashion. You know, when I was growing up, like women had shoulder pads and guys had mullets, and those things went out of fashion. I think the mullets are like slowly coming back in.
Yeah.
But in
rightly so.
Yeah. But in the DEI space, it's very like the terms and stuff and what ideas are trendy is kind of come and gone. And right now, like intersectionality is big. It's not just like a buzzword, like it's leaked into. So I run a social psychology program at NYU, and our students are using that term more in their presentations. And a lot of the same concepts were around 20, 30 years ago. And it was called multiple categorization and cross categorization. And so a lot of those concepts have been around. They're just there's like a new spin on them. That's like the trendy way to describe it. But that's why I'm like a bit sometimes skeptical when things go in and out of trend, because a lot of the ideas are grounded in things that I studied cross categorization in my PhD like 20 years ago. So it doesn't seem that novel or fresh. It's just a trendy way of talking about it.
But there's some nerve that it's striking. There's some fundamental human need for social, you know, like what's underneath the fad. You know, you're a world's expert on this topic, so I'm sure you have insight into that. So let me say like where I think a lot of this is coming from. And then I'll tell you why I think we're trying to solve it in the wrong ways. Oh, interesting. Okay. So a lot of this, so in America, and again, as you know, I'm Canadian, so I kind of feel like an anthropologist seeing this. Yeah. A lot of it comes in America because of historical discrimination, right? History of slavery, all kinds of institutional discrimination, Jim Crow, and a lot of those like carry forward into the present day. And so let's say at universities, you made the comment about like our admissions policies. What we're trying to do is correct first problems that have been part of the institutions and government for a long, long time. But it's a little like putting a Band-Aid on like someone who's like missing a leg. And so a lot of it, and not only that, where would the Band-Aid go? Exactly. Like the Band-Aid is not going to work. It affects, you know, all these like discussions, like the lawsuit against Harvard for affirmative action. Yeah. You know, Harvard admits so few Black students in general. Right. Most Black students go to community colleges or state colleges. Most people overwhelmingly go to like community colleges, state colleges. And we're like almost not talking about that at all. And that's where like the real impact is. You would get like far more benefit to those communities by like pouring resources into those environments. And so it's like a little bit like. Good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, but yet we obsess about this. Like the New York Times will have 42 articles on this one thing that affects like 42 people. And so, and I don't blame them in the sense that a lot of those people go on to be like on the Supreme Court or things like that. Yeah. But it really misses the mark for most people. It doesn't help lift most people out of poverty or working class environments. And so that's kind of like my first problem is like we're thinking about solutions at the wrong level and way too late. If you're talking about admissions to a PhD program, you're going to have so many other things that happen before someone's 30 years old
that are going to be the real barriers that actually matter, like Head Start programs or something. Okay, so now let's go to companies, organizations, right? So DEI has been growing for about 30 years, long before the present moment, like all this funding. Originally, it came because like there was all these lawsuits for discrimination. It was costing companies millions and millions of dollars. And so there's a lack of representation. Most CEOs are like white men. At one point, I think there was more Fortune 500 CEOs named John than all women combined.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, women see that and they're up in arms and rightfully so. And so we're trying to correct for those types of things. But then again, it's like a lot like the solutions we have often don't work. So one thing that I'll just tell you, I'm writing my next book right now on how to make groups smarter. And so just this last week was digging into DEI issues because there's tons of studies about why these corporate initiatives fail.
Or backfire.
Or even backfire in many cases.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are focused on like calling out bias or making people feel a sense of threat or anxiety about getting things wrong or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so it makes people super anxious.
Yeah.
And it makes managers and employees very reactive because they feel like they're being forced to do something. Yeah. And it often points fingers at people for being like bad actors or white supremacists.
Oh, wow.
And so, or, the Robin DiAngelo model of like going in and making people cry. And then if white women cry, then she complains that they're like weaponizing their white tears. Yeah, there's like a whole...
All that feels psychologically unhealthy.
Yeah. So if you study, which you study last, 50, 70 years of psychology, you just know like those like the worst possible ingredients to like make a culture healthy.
Sure. Yeah. Or even empowering.
Yeah. It's not empowering. It's super stressful. It makes interracial interactions more awkward because people are so anxious about doing or saying the wrong thing. And so then they become evasive. They avoid those interactions or having like authentic, supportive relationships. Another thing that fails is it's very focused on like segregating people into different groups right now. And the premise is good, I think, for support for minorities. But here's a couple downsides. One is there was a recent book that just came out looking at like what works in this space. And one of the best things that works are mentorship programs where people are of different genders and different races and different backgrounds.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because you get exposed to somebody. It's based on like contact theory. You build real relationships. You break down stereotypes. You start to understand where someone's coming from. And so that's like, it's the exact opposite in some ways of what's being done.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll tell you another one. We'll see if you like this. This is one of my favorite studies in the last 2 or 3 years in this space. It was done by Sohad Marar at University of Madison, Wisconsin. So again, a lot of this focuses right now, the rhetoric the last few years about everything's white supremacist. Right. And so you have college students coming into this environment where they're just being told that over and over again or pointing out egregious acts of racism or whatever. Yeah. What they've been trying to do is find out, first of all, what do students actually believe?
Yes.
And they do a survey and they find out something like 80 to 90% of students are overwhelmingly in support of an inclusive campus environment.
Okay.
So very few people are against this stuff to begin with.
Right.
And so instead of focusing on the small percentage of people who are against it, they create posters and videos and messaging that, look, 90% of other students on your campus actually fully support an inclusive environment and value diversity. And they lead with that message instead. So a really positive message, but one that reflects that the true norms of the environment. And guess what happens? 2 things that are really cool. First thing is white students become more inclusive because they realize, saying a sexist or racist joke's not cool here.
It's not cool here.
And so they actually don't do the thing that they would otherwise do to fit in.
That makes sense.
And then how do minority students do? They actually love it. They feel more sense of belonging.
They're like, wow, they don't need to be paranoid.
Yeah, they don't need to be constantly paranoid that the whole environment they're in is like someone's going to get them at some moment. Yeah. And then not only that, their grades go up. Oh, wow. Because guess what? Then they're able to focus on school. And then the cool thing, and this is like we're always worried about closing these like racial achievement gaps. It closes. Their grades go so much, it's as if they were from a majority group. The minority kids, suddenly their grades match up to the majority kids. If they're in a condition where they learned that the norms were inclusive.
So it's like the opposite of stereotype threat.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite. And it's like a positive message. It's true. And all you're doing is revealing what actually people privately believe, but you're not focusing so much on the downsides and the small number of people who have these kind of negative opinions. Instead, you're kind of like just saying, look, people around you really value these things.
Yeah, yes, I do like that.
Okay.
But it seems like it's harder to do that in other environments such as social media, since we can't control, you know, the algorithm. Now, there's a new paper that you're a co-author on that is one of my top 10 favorite journal article papers of all time now.
Oh, awesome.
It's called Inside the Funhouse Mirror Factory, How Social Media Distorts Perceptions of Norms. Basically one of my top titles, I should have said. The article is pretty good too. But it is true. Like, our social media, it's the most extreme voices. Like, we all knew this to be true, but it's nice to see you actually have data on this. Yeah. So talk a little about what you found. Yeah.
So I'll just give you a statistic. When people are talking about, like, let's say politics on Twitter or other social media platforms, 10% of people produce 97% of the content. And so that and
the loudest.
And the loudest, and guess who those are? If you look at those people, they're the most extreme. So it's really only people at the extremes that are spouting off nonstop. And so when you open your social media app and you log in,
over and over,
all you're seeing is people from extremes. And then guess what? They're all yelling at each other. And so
true.
And so it gives you a false perception of what most people believe. It makes it a really hostile environment to weigh in. Yeah. And it also really disincentivizes people who have, like, nuanced or complex or empathic views. Nuanced views, yeah. And so if they weigh in some way, they're just immediately attacked, probably by both sides. Actually, research shows that moderates find it more hostile than anybody else. Because people at the extremes are happy to yell at each other all day. Like, normies don't enjoy that. And they're like, I'm just going to shut up. And so you create such a hostile environment that the whole middle, like 90% of the distribution, it doesn't speak up.
Are you familiar with L. Todd Rose's work on collective illusions?
No.
He wrote a whole book on that because he collected data showing that most people are not aware that the other members of the group really do agree with what they think. So everyone's thinking that the most extreme view is the norm in a group. That's the collective illusion. But actually, when you get down to it, most people really do agree with each other if they just would talk out loud about it. You know,
that's the same logic behind that DEI intervention.
Yeah.
Or they also use this on colleges with binge drinking.
Oh,
this was very famous research where.
I remember those days.
Yeah, everybody on dorms thinks that, like, binge drinking is what you have to do to fit in because they constantly see people doing it.
Right.
And so they feel pressure to do it even if they don't like it. And they'll do it to fit in. And guess what? They get sick, they're hungover, their grades plummet, and they're not happy. And if you just do a survey and you realize something like 80-90% of students don't like binge drinking, they like going to a party and having a drink or two, but they don't want this pressure to get drunk. And once you reveal that to everybody, binge drinking goes way down.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That'd be a good intervention.
Yeah. The intervention is just like telling people what most people privately believe but are scared to say.
But I mean, that won't get you into the fraternity if it's part of the hazing process. That's cold comfort for pledges.
Yeah.
Well, what is moral tuning? I want to link some of this to morality. Because it does seem like when you're viewing everything through the lens of identity, you start to sometimes think you're morally superior, right? Like you're like, oh, well, our group, are angels, and them over there are the devils.
Yeah. So once you're part of a group, you adopt their value system, and you start to judge other people who aren't part of the group more harshly. And we have a new paper on this. People are moral hypocrites. Oh. They judge, and this is especially true in politics. When their group does something, they don't punish them. But when the other group does the exact same thing, they're more likely to punish them and say it's wrong. And so that's a real toxic environment to be in as well, because you're just not treating people fairly. You're not judging them fairly.
It is very toxic. Relates to Tessa West's book on toxic people at work. Trying to do a callback. Okay, so is that what you mean by moral tuning?
Moral tuning is just that. A lot of this is also not happening at the level of reasoning. So people are, it's not that they're reasoning in ways that lead to this. It's just that once they're part of a group, even when they're not thinking about it, they're being different in terms of their judgments.
It's the intra-group level of analysis.
Yeah, and it's like an automatic thing. It's something quickly that comes to mind, like an intuition or a reflex.
Now, we're seeing that all over the place right now, aren't we, with collective victimhood?
Yeah.
Which is a whole research literature in and of itself. Have you been staying up to date on the social psychology of collective?
I'm a bit aware of it.
Yeah. I find it fascinating. I've been diving really deep into. There's a theory called moral typecasting, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where we tend to like we like to moral typecast people as either the victim or the perpetrator. Yeah. And when you do that, it it creates a sense of competitive victimhood where everyone's competing for that victim label, because once you get the victim label, you get you can do whatever you want morally.
Yeah.
Like,
it gives you license to be awful.
You do license to be awful. Now that's my new band name. I think that's
that's the subtitle of your book. There,
I feel like that should be a good band. Mike, should we start a band?
License to be awful.
Oh yeah, you can play, right?
License. I can sing.
Yeah.
I can sing. Yeah. I love it. So I mean, you're seeing it everywhere right now, and so your work is just so unbelievably relevant. You must look at the news and just like shake your damn head every day, right?
Yeah, or it inspires us to do studies.
Yeah.
I see something crazy in the news. Next thing you know, I'm like studying misinformation or conspiracy theories or cults or something.
I love that. Yeah, that's true.
It's a cool thing about like studying social psychology. It's like if you're curious and be like, why the hell are they doing that crazy thing? And then you can dig in and figure out why. Why does social media feel so messed up?
It's a good question. And I mean, the algorithm, really is to blame.
Yeah, like I'll give you an example. Yeah. Like my office is on Broadway. You're a New Yorker. It's chaos.
Yeah.
The city's chaos, especially like some streets downtown Broadway. And I would like be on Twitter at work in my office, and it'd be so chaotic. And I go outside to like grab lunch, and it's like everybody seems way more friendly. And these are New Yorkers I'm talking about. And I'm like, okay, well, something weird is going on that's drawing this out of people. And it is the algorithm. There's evidence now that the algorithm amplifies hostile, negative content. And also it's these extreme people. They're driving the conversation and building huge followings.
Well, this wouldn't happen if people didn't gravitate towards extreme people as well. Yeah. So there's something about human nature. Entertainment. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
The power of entertainment surpasses any scholarly, nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
There's something about humans that we need entertainment. Yeah. What the hell?
I think it's a little bit like this. Yeah. Like if you're driving down the highway and like you see a car accident, everybody slows down to take a look, right? Called rubbernecking. Yeah. But what happens with the technology is that if they see you rubbernecking, they cause more accidents. That's essentially what these companies do. If more people are stopping to look at this, we're going to show them more of this. Yeah. But no one wants to live in a world, just because I rubberneck with a car accident doesn't mean I want to live in a world where every time I drive down the highway, it's just a row of accidents.
It's a great point.
And so that's kind of also the way that like these technologies are designed to keep us hooked, because it's that they know those things are entertaining.
It's a perfect analogy. Have you ever used that analogy before?
Yeah, I think I used it on my paper.
Because it makes so much immediate sense. Yeah. You were part of a legit mega study. Mm-hmm. Now, there's not many papers in our field what they label themselves mega study. It's almost a little vain. But this, it's like, I mean, imagine like
another an item on your narcissism measure among scientists.
Like, this is like the legendary study, and you put that in your title. But you guys did mega study identifying effective interventions to strengthen Americans' democratic attitudes. What are some of your favorite interventions that came out of that?
Okay, so I'll tell you that there's a fun story for this. So this was a competition to see how we could reduce polarization. Okay. Just the part of polarization where people just hate each other and want to engage in violence against one another. So it was a group at Stanford, and they just said everybody can submit their intervention. Okay. And people from around the world, scientists as well as like policy and practitioner people, submitted an intervention. There's 252 submissions.
That's incredible.
And then they got a bunch of political scientists and experts, and they picked the best 25. So my lab, our intervention was one of the top 25. Wow. And then we had to like flesh it out. And then they went into the field and gave these interventions to 32,000 Americans. Wow. Like very representative of every race and age and gender.
That's an amazing study.
It's a really cool study. Wow. And they had monetary prizes, which you don't see much in science, for the best ones that worked. Okay. And they were looking to see, does it reduce polarization? Does it increase support for democracy, which is under threat? Does it reduce partisan violence? And our intervention, I'm proud to say, was like based on my book. We tried to I met with my lab and we tried to figure out like what, based on our book and what we talk about the principles of identity, what intervention would we create that kind of like follows these principles? And so we submitted it. And so I was actually quite anxious because I was like, if this fails, it's I'm going to throw this book in the trash.
That is funny. And it wasn't validation of your book.
And I will admit it was not the best one, but it was the third best.
Okay.
Which I think is pretty good if you start with 252.
That's pretty good, yeah.
And it was about creating common identities. Okay. It was, instead of like highlighting conflict, it was highlighting what we share in common and core values in the history of American democracy. Good. And so the best one, I don't know if you've seen this, was a Heineken beer commercial where they brought together people to build a bar, and then they built it, and they got to know each other as they built this thing, and then they put 2 Heineken bottles, very professional commercial, and then they showed them videos that they had of the people talking about their politics before they got to the set, and they had people from very different sides of the political spectrum.
Did they have trans people there?
Yeah, one woman was a trans woman, if I'm remembering correctly, and they said, "Do you want to talk about your differences?"
Cool.
And over a beer. And everybody's like, yeah, actually, I got to know you as a human being, so I can like talk about this now with you. And that was the most effective. And I think it was just showing like an example of contact.
I love that.
Contact hypothesis. That if people do something together and they get to know each other as humans, then they can actually have real conversations.
Jay Van Bevel, that's the opposite of all the protests we're seeing on our college campuses right now.
Yeah.
We're not fostering intergroup dialogue, are we?
I just gave a talk at Columbia like 2 days before the...
You're bragging now.
No, it was 2 days before they were the police.
Better school.
Oh, yeah, Columbia's the better school, yeah. But they're also where the whole encampment and protest movement started. And the director there of the Center of Conflict and Cooperation who hosted me, he's a peace psychologist. And he told me something really profound, which is he said, we've trained our undergraduate students really good in collective action and protest, which I think is really important. But we have not trained them in peace. We have not trained people, our institutions from every part of the education system is not training people into conflict resolution, how to have a sustainable, peaceful relationship and bridge differences. And so and this was like a couple of days before this whole thing spilled over, it was thinking this is like a educational deficit that we have as a nation.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Can you put me in touch with him, by the way?
Yeah, Peter Coleman.
Please put me in touch with him.
Okay.
I just, I'm a professor at Columbia, and I just recently...
Oh, yeah, you should definitely talk to him. He's at the Teachers College.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I recently gave a talk for about 25 professors at Columbia. I gave a closed meeting talk about how we can foster more intergroup reconciliation.
Oh, yeah, you should definitely team up with them.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this topic right now.
Yeah.
But it just seems like we're going about it the opposite way from like good scientific practices. Like it's like what are we doing? You know, we're it's like the social media. It's like we're fostering people yelling at each other about the worst thing they perceive about each other, as opposed to starting with any common humanity. Yeah,
I mean, this is like so collective action. It works best if it's sufficiently disruptive that it gets attention. Okay. And so these protests have been successful at that level, but they haven't really been successful persuading anybody. Right. Very few schools have adopted any of their resolutions. Some have, but I would also argue that the universities have done a bad job by a lot of them immediately reacting and bringing the police in to protest that was a bad idea. Yeah, and this is again something we literally wrote about the research on this in our book, which was that if you bring the police into a peaceful protest, any type of protest, we weren't talking about Gaza protests, but research on many types of topics finds that it just creates more conflict. It creates an us versus them situation, and it actually hardens the protesters, and they often will resort to more aggressive, disruptive, and violent tactics, even if they were peaceful before. And so this whole thing at Columbia, where they first brought the police in, there was no other encampments around the whole country. Within a week, there was like about 100.
Yeah,
and that was
start at NYU.
It started at Columbia.
Oh, no, Columbia, right?
Yeah, and so that was a mistake that spilled over across the whole country. That would have been our prediction from our book, and it just seemed to, almost like be exactly what happened.
It threw fire on a flame.
Yeah. You got to like de-escalate. The administration has a responsibility to go in and try to like find some pathway as well. So it's like the conflict resolution failures were often on both sides. And I'll say this was from reporting in the New York Times. The president of Columbia, I don't know if you know her, but she had to talk about why she brought in the police to the Senate or something. And they had said unanimously they didn't want the police there. And they also asked her, did you go down and talk to the protesters? And she said no.
I went down and talked to the protesters.
Yeah, but that's my whole entire point. Wow. And your point is, it's not just that these students aren't engaging in dialogue. Yeah. Their mentors and role models aren't doing it either. Yeah. And so you really have a failure from every party around like finding ways to find collective solutions, in my opinion.
There's so much we could be doing. to differently
Yeah.
define collective solutions. I mean, I'm all about finding the common humanity first before, and I know we're such a tribal species. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. But like, why does that always have to be the predominant? There's so many sides to humans, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to think like, in an evolutionary psychology kind of way, what module can we trigger?
Yeah.
And why can't we trigger more of the collective like we do have a cooperation module, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't know it today these days.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to one of my favorite studies. I mean, you probably remember this, the Robbers Cave experiment.
Yeah.
They brought these two groups of kids, had them compete, and then they were just like screaming at each other.
I know.
And then they had them fix a problem together.
Yeah.
The researchers sabotaged the water supply. All the kids had to work together to fix the water supply. They had a car that was at the bottom of the hill. All the kids had to work together to push up the hill. And then by the end of those two things, the kids suddenly all liked each other. They had made friends in the other camp. And at the end, all the kids got together and asked if they could all take the same bus ride home. And so we should look more towards finding subordinate goals. What is something that we can work together on that will achieve some goal? And we've kind of lost that politically. We've lost it at university campuses. A lot of organizations have lost it or never had it. Like I sometimes get asked to go in and consult in organizations where they had a merger or like sales doesn't talk to HR and they don't understand why and they're sabotaging each other. There's all kinds of incentive structures we create and we don't mentor people to solve problems and come to resolutions in ways that are collectively helpful. And so then you get like conflicts and sometimes intractable conflicts, sometimes violent conflicts. And it's just, we all lose when that happens.
Man, how can we?
That's sort of be a downer.
No, but it's like, but how can more people get that memo?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of non-good faith actors in the activism space. Like, can we be honest? Like, there are a lot of activists, not all of them, obviously not all of them, and obviously there are healthy protests that are productive, but there also are a lot of narcissistic activists that, this kind of, then there's a whole research literature on collective narcissism, and I just feel like these days, like collective narcissism is fueling intergroup competition, the victimhood Olympics.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, cause I have some research on collective narcissism. Glad you brought it up because you study narcissism.
Yeah.
I have a couple projects on collective narcissism. So first I'll tell you, imagine a Venn diagram.
Throw in our scale.
Yeah.
Okay. Triad scale.
Okay. So imagine a Venn diagram, two overlapping circles.
Yeah.
And on one of the circles is national identity or any type of group identity, how much you identify the group. And the other part is collective narcissism. And those are correlated. So there's a part where they overlap that's bad. Yeah. But if you actually pull them apart and you look at the effects of collective narcissism separate from group identity and the effects of group identity once you pull out collective narcissism, they have opposite effects. Collective narcissism.
You did that study?
This was Alexandra Chahotska, and I collaborated with her.
Yeah, I've cited that study.
Okay, yeah. So she's found this over and over and over again. Collective narcissists believe in conspiracy theories. Yeah. People who are strongly identified do not. Yeah. Collective narcissists hate immigrants. People who are nationally identified do not. People who are nationally identified want to work with other groups or any healthy identification. People who have this kind of narcissistic collective identification refuse to work with other groups and discriminate.
It's because you're parceling out the variants associated with antagonism.
Yep.
Personality trait.
And they see themselves as victims. Yeah. And also leaders who are collective narcissists, and you can probably think of a few, don't actually care about the members of their group. They care about their group's image. They're obsessed with their group's image, and so they're super defensive about protecting that image.
Being recognized for their greatness.
Yeah. And people, exactly. And people who care about the group intrinsically and more genuinely care about all the group members. Yeah. And so you get very different behaviors and beliefs. And it's like they're correlated a lot of times, so people confound them. And they think that any type of group identity is bad. But really what we got to do is train people what is the unhealthy group identity and pull that out of groups and isolate, not respond to it. And then we got to cultivate healthy identities.
I couldn't agree more with that. I in my new book I'm working on, I talk about healthy and group love versus unhealthy and group love or pride. You can have healthy pride that's empowering, and you can have pride that is totally ensconced in victimhood. Yeah. So we need to get the memo out there more. I don't know if we're going to do much to convince the narcissist that they're wrong. You know, it's not like they'll hear about the research and be like, oh, you're right. You know, I've been going about it wrong because BB et al. Or whatever says what, I don't know. I invented a name. You know, so I don't know. But I feel like we're both professors, you know, on campuses where the lot's going. What can we do? You know, we should be doing. I feel like psychologists should be doing more all across because psychologists are really in a good state to, you know, they're equipped with the knowledge of what could be done. And I don't feel like we're not consulted as much.
Yeah, I mean, you have this great podcast, as you said.
Thank you.
I know, but it's to share the research. I share a lot on social media. Yeah, I mean, these are the things, write books, we can talk, but it's like, I think we need to bake this into education. Like that was what I was really convinced by. Yeah. It's like, we need a first year class on every campus in this country teaching this stuff.
Agreed.
We need maybe it in high schools, you know, we need to like do this or like, so my stepson, Maddie, he learns already. He's great. He's 10 years old and his class are teaching them the difference between opinion and fact, right? Because a lot of people, when they read the newspaper, they can't tell what is the actual like investigative journalism and what's just someone's opinion. So they're teaching kids at that age to have like that awareness to be able to understand when they're seeing news, whether it's just someone's opinion or not. Yeah. And so like, that's a skill set that's new that they're realizing they have to train people because grown adults don't know it. Well, we could train these things too.
Well, okay. Well, then let's segue into the chapter of your book, The Future of Identity. Okay, what do you see? Has your thinking changed at all since you wrote that chapter?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's another. I mean, we were thinking of the future of identity around democracy, climate change.
I know, but where would you write now? If you...
I mean, I'm a little more cynical. And partly, again, it's just that the technology, now we have AI. And so there's all these other like technologies coming up and we don't know how they're going to disrupt us. Yeah. We don't know.
Wait till the sex bots come.
The sex bots. I was seeing on.
It's coming.
Okay. I was seeing on social media this morning that the new OpenAI release is like, it's going to be like the movie Her, where we have these like romantic relationships with AI.
I mean, I see these kinds of articles. It's like, it's so interesting to think in our lifetime what is going to replace real human connection.
Well, we were just talking about dating in New York. Yeah. This was an interview yesterday or 2 days ago that went viral on social media. It was the CEO of Bumble. So Bumble, do you use Bumble as a dating app?
Yes, and didn't they reverse it where women were complaining that they had to be the initiators?
Yeah, so the whole point of the app was I've never used it, but my understanding is the whole point of the app is that it's safer for women because they initiate all the contact.
Yeah, but they want to be.
Well, yeah. So then they were complaining that a lot of them, or too many were complaining they don't like the app because they actually don't want to do all the work.
There's something deeply ingrained in evolutionary psychology.
I think that was it backfired. And then but also women, and I don't blame them. Like on those apps, you're so many people are contacting you. You have to go through millions of conversations.
Tell me about it. All these people contacting me. Yeah.
I think women get contacted way more on the apps. No, I mean, that's on the data.
I'm obviously joking.
And professional women or any women are busy and they don't want to have to wade through 40 long conversations with 40 different guys to find out what one is worth like going for coffee with. Yeah. And so this is a new innovation. This is the solution. Tell me if you think this will work. Okay. They're going to create an AI. They're integrate AI into Bumble so that if you're a woman on the app, all these guys contact you, it can just it will have conversations with all of them and tell you who matches up with you.
Oh, well, you have to have a lot of trust in AI to do that.
Yeah. First of all, you have a lot of trust.
The perfect one could slip through the cracks.
And it's assuming this AI knows what you're looking for. Yeah. But then guess what? This was the CEO also said. But of course, the guys get AI too. And because it's unfair for them just to be, and no guy just wants to talk to a wall of AI chatbots. So he'll have a chatbot, you'll have a chatbot, and your chatbots will just be having a million conversations with other chatbots. And so all the dating now and conversation and messiness of dating is all going to be mediated through two AIs just like talking to one another.
Honestly, that's the complete opposite direction.
It's the opposite of like humanity. You've like weeded out any human element of the interaction of the dating environment.
We already do that with like swiping right or left. You only look at a picture. What information can you gather from a picture, really? Oh, man. Well, that's disconcerting. I want us to end on a happy note about something. I mean, is everything going to shit? Let's give me the future of identity in a positive way.
Okay, so future of identity in a positive way. I'll give you a trend. I'll give you a couple of trends that have been really positive, and we don't talk about them almost ever.
Thank you.
The first is that globally, we have cooperated more than ever in history. And if you look at the rate of like humans killed from intergroup conflicts in the last century, it's plummeted. And it's because humans are not, we have this tribal instinct, you pointed out, and it's baked into our DNA.
Yes.
But we have big prefrontal cortices that can develop solutions. Yeah. And so we've built solutions. We've used reasoning. We've built things like the United Nations and other things, World Economic Forum and stuff to find out ways to cooperate. And so intergroup violence has plummeted in the last 50 years. It might not feel like it if you open the newspaper, but if you just look at actual millions of people killed in intergroup conflict, it's gone way down.
Yeah. Have you read Steven Pinker's book?
Yeah, yes, I have, and it's entirely consistent with what he says. We focus on whatever war is going on, but objectively we're way safer. And other ways, and Steven Pinker points this out, is like child poverty has plummeted in the last 100 years. We've made huge progress on so many of these things because we've cooperated and worked together and created institutions and found better solutions. It's just that we never focus on those. We never talk about it. And so like a little bit of what my point is like, if we just stay susceptible to the economic incentive structure of social media or mainstream media where they always focus on the negative and those stories sell and they're on the front page of the newspaper or they're being bumped up by the algorithm or the extreme people are dominating conversation, we're going to miss the broader trends of the things that have been so impressive and positive about human nature. And we should be focusing more on those positive things. Like I was saying with the norms of inclusion. If you tell people that most people value this, then more people actually do the good thing. Yeah. And so maybe I'll end on this. One of the sections of our last chapter of our book was about climate change. That's one of the big challenges we face as a humanity.
People on the right don't think so.
Well, they don't think so. So we just had a paper that was published on this, came out like 2 days ago. 50,000 people, 60 countries. We looked at climate change.
Okay.
And I'll tell you the data on left versus right, 60 countries. Yeah. And you are right. Conservatives believe in climate change less than liberals.
Okay.
And they're less supportive of climate change policy than liberals. Okay. But we also measured real behavior. We had a task where people had to work hard and we planted trees. And by the way, people worked hard enough in this study. We got a sponsor that we were able to plant over 330,000 trees in the real world based on the behavior of people. So we made them work really hard and had a real behavior, not just like checking, like answering 1 to 7 on a Likert scale. There's no difference between liberals and conservatives in real behavior. Oh, wow. They worked just as hard, no matter where they were on the political spectrum, to plant trees. Wow. And so I was like, okay, there actually are grounds for cooperation on real things. I think what we have to do is spend more time not talking about our differences all the time, but finding common ground. Guess what? Everybody loves trees. Everybody loves like beautiful nature. And that's something that like you can build on. If you get people to do that, then maybe they start to identify as someone who cares about the environment. And then you do the next thing.
It's like puppies.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love puppies?
Yeah. Find something that people love it and scaffold on that. So,
I love that.
So that's kind of like, even though we have these barriers, there are things there that are like shared norms and values. We need to find them and harness and do those things and then build off those. And so that was like some promising data in that.
Yes, leading with the common humanity. It's just like, it's so obvious. And it's so hard for humans to do that when the ego is involved. Yeah. It's just like, how can we have people quiet their egos?
Yes. And let me tell you the worst. Yeah. We also tested a bunch of interventions to try to get people, see what motivated people to support climate change the best. Yeah, let me tell you the worst intervention.
Can I guess?
Guess.
I don't know what the whole realm is. But
of climate change messaging. Yeah. It's doomer messages. If you say that there's doom and gloom and the world's just going to burn to a crisp, that was it backfired. People did less environmental behavior. Okay. And it was also one of the worst at getting them to support climate change policy. They just like, fuck it.
People did what?
They don't want to support climate change policy either. And they don't want to engage in real behavior because they're just give up. Why should I do anything? The world's just burning. And so it's also like that. But guess what? That was the best intervention for getting people to talk about it on social media.
Can you tell me the intervention again?
Intervention was like a doom and gloom message about climate change that we're all doomed.
Okay, gotcha.
And the world is burning and it's going to burn to a crisp.
Gotcha.
If people hear that message, they want to share that on social media because guess what? That gets lots of clicks and likes, but they don't want to engage any real behavior and they don't want to support any policy. And so the types of things that that motivate people to share online might be the things that hurt us the most in the real world. So we need more positive messages. That was the doom and gloom message. It's kind of exactly what you talk about all the time.
So maybe
that we need more positive messages and less doom and gloom about these things.
Well, Stephen Pinker would appreciate that
message.
He's been trying to ring.
He's been saying that for a long time, and people pile on him on social media.
There's like a site, humanprogress.org or something, where they're constantly trying to tell people about how much humanity is making progress. Yeah. We do need to get those messages out more. I see Jordan Peterson posting a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. There are some people who are seeing it, but it's like, I wish that was more part of the conversation.
I do too. Jay Van Bevel, it was a delight to talk to you on the show. And,
thanks so much for having me.
I think your work is so important.
Thanks, Scott. It's always a pleasure.